For folks that struggle with toxic patterns in love, that have identified insecure attachment styles as being at the root of the issue, often there are three things that happen after discovering this information. Number one, they learn all they can about their attachment style as well as how to be more emotionally honest and communicate with their partner. Number two, they try to educate their partner and implement the strategies they have learned. And number three, after that, one of two outcomes occur. A partner starts to respond positively in the relationship and it evolves in a healthy direction, whether that is deepening the intimacy in the relationship or amicably realizing it's time to move on. Or secondly, their partner becomes increasingly anxious, avoidant, belligerent, withdrawing, and or overall just increasingly defensive and or toxic, and things actually get worse. If you find yourself in the second scenario where you have done all the right things and yet your partner continues to be defensive and or to try to pull away from you with toxic patterns in love, then this video is for you. Because we are going to explore some cliff notes on attachment theory and trauma. And that is because if you have done all the work and you are finally clear on what you want in this relationship and your partner just can't seem to clap on, it's usually because there is a trauma reenactment occurring. And so today we are going to be exploring the impact of trauma on the brain, as well as the experience of dissociation for traumatized individuals. The goal is to provide the necessary education so that individuals with attachment trauma can consciously choose personal growth and thriving in love, rather than continuing to unconsciously fall prey to attachment and survival triggers. By the end of this video, you will fully understand your partner's obstinance if they are struggling to keep up with you, have a much more realistic picture of what is truly within your control in this relationship, and what is possible for getting what you really want in love with them specifically. Now, before we get into today's topic, if you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Briana MacWilliam, and I am a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist with more than 15 years in the field, helping adults struggling with insecure attachment go from self-doubting to self-sovereign so they can attract the soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want. And I do this using a psycho-spiritual approach to creative arts interventions, which I call the MacWilliam method. The content on my YouTube channel is derived from my online courses, which you can learn more about through the link in the caption of this video. If you would like to learn more about your attachment style, you can take the 4-question quiz. If you like what you see and hear and you want to learn more, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week, and I wouldn't want you to miss out. Now, to begin, I would like to define attachment in general. Attachment, as it is understood in psychological terms, describes an instinctual impulse to remain in close proximity, mentally, emotionally, and physically, to a caregiver or a loved one. This is because your survival brain and your nervous system has decided that this person is essential to your survival on all of these levels. Now, your attachment style reflects predictable attitudes and behaviors, which are geared towards coping with any threats to that proximity, whether that proximity reflects too much or too little mental, emotional, and physical space and or distance between you and your loved one or caregiver. So in babies or children, we recognize this when they are playing on the playground and look back to their mothers for reassurance that it's okay to continue exploring. Then perhaps they encounter something new and strange and they go running back to home base as if to recharge their batteries in the safe zone. They need to know that mom is close by so that they can feel free to explore. On the other hand, if the mother is smothering and overprotective, you might have a child that perpetually ignores her warnings and tries at every chance to get away from her, sometimes making poor decisions and inaccurately measuring their risks. Now, attachment traumas occur when our proximity needs are either unmet or they are perverted. Unsatisfied or perverted needs might look like needing reassurance, and instead you get dismissive advice like buck up and be strong, time heals all wounds, or stop being hysterical, it's not that big of a deal. Or maybe you need to learn how to do something to make a decision on your own, and a parent refuses to let you fail, so they insert themselves into every challenge you encounter, preventing you from learning valuable lessons and discovering that you can make a mistake and that it's okay to make mistakes. Or maybe you want some time and space to process your own emotional reactions to things, and you have a parent or a loved one that's constantly narrating how you should be feeling about things and that you don't have a right to feel a certain way about it. Now, these unmet needs or perversions come to characterize the nature of the bond that forms between you and your attachment figures. In essence, this is a template or a blueprint for how a child will grow into an adult and understand love and relationships. In other words, if you have an insecure attachment style, you typically forget how to play. You stifle your imagination and your creativity, and you are more likely to opt for the familiar in order to retain a sense of safety and control, even if it is unbearable, rather than entertain a curiosity for the unknown. Now, the word trauma has become pretty commonplace, and it is often used to describe situations that are simply stressful. Oh, I was traumatized by the line at Starbucks today. Ugh, I was traumatized by the last episode of The Real Housewives of New York. I was traumatized by the spotty Wi-Fi at the hotel. But a truer definition of trauma would be an experience that defies your capacity to cope and leaves you with a feeling of complete and utter helplessness. When we are talking about the psychological and neurological aspects of trauma, it is something that overwhelms people and their resources, particularly on the level of survival, i.e., your attachment system. Of course, stressful situations can ultimately elevate to the level of traumatizing, depending on the circumstances and the individual's temperament. Therefore, an experience that is traumatizing to one person may not be traumatizing to another. For example, running into a burning building to save a cat might be traumatizing to one person, but for a firefighter, perhaps it's all in a day's work. In our last video in this series, we discussed Omri Gillis' research into attachment styles and epigenetics. In particular, Gillis found that individuals with severe insecurities had smaller hippocampuses, and the hippocampus is an integral part of the survival brain. This means that, in effect, individuals with attachment trauma have brains similar to those with post-traumatic stress. So let's take a look at a few cliff notes on what happens to the brain and body when it is under stress. In a stressful situation, adrenaline kicks on in the kidneys and sets off the amygdala in the survival part of the brain. The amygdala sets off an alarm in the body, and it triggers our fight or flight responses in the nervous system, getting us ready to respond. However, once this alarm goes off, it is going to increase the laying down of certain kinds of emotional and sensorial memories. And so now, after the amygdala goes off, it is the job of the hippocampus to properly organize and integrate those memories and that information into the mature part of the brain, which is called the neocortex. And this allows us to make sense of our experiences. And so the hippocampus is like a librarian that tags our memories with important information about where and when they occurred. Now, stress also releases cortisol in the brain. And under threat, cortisol revs up our metabolism so that we are more alert and energized. Cortisol will also shut off the way the hippocampus functions because your instincts have decided that your full attention should just be on surviving. Therefore, under sustained threats for long periods of time, cortisol can become toxic to the way that the brain functions and grows. At the same time, adrenaline is still going to increase the laying down of intense emotional memories. So your ability to perform higher executive functions, like focus and attend, make plans, control your impulses, listen empathically, assume someone else's perspective, tolerate ambiguity, problem solve, manage your anger effectively, and feel relaxed and at ease, all of that is diminished, while your emotions are becoming increasingly intense, overwhelming, impulsive, dysregulating, and unorganized. Needless to say, this interferes with your ability to cope with stressful situations. It also leads to significant difficulties with organizing your internal emotional life. And that, of course, affects every other aspect of your life, including love and relationships. In other words, you may become subject to dissociation. But before we finish up our discussion with dissociation, I'd like to pause here for a moment and ask, does this information offer any new insights for you on the effect of trauma on your attachment style? Have you ever experienced a triggered attachment response in a relationship? Please let me know in the comments below. And remember to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I put out videos once a week, and I wouldn't want you to miss out. So let's continue our discussion of dissociation. When cortisol reaches toxic levels in the brain, and that leads to difficulties in organizing your inner emotional life, we might equate this with the experience of being dissociated. Now, some studies suggest that peritraumatic dissociation, which is being dissociated at the time of a traumatic event, is the biggest risk factor for developing post-traumatic stress. Now, developmental attachment research has also shown that disorganized attachment, sometimes called fearful avoidant attachment or disordered attachment or anxious avoidant attachment, is at least one of the precursors to people who experience dysfunctional forms of dissociation. Now, there is a normal degree of dissociation that many of us participate in, like daydreaming, fantasizing, thinking about your next vacation while your boss is chewing you out, or getting lost in a project and losing track of time. But pathological dissociation is different. And this can leave you with a sense of what's called depersonalization, derealization, dissociative amnesia, having out-of-body experiences, emotional numbness or inexplicably shutting down, remembering and retelling memories or stories with narrative discrepancies, and experiencing altered time perception. In essence, the hippocampus has become blocked from processing things properly. And when that hippocampal librarian cannot tag things in the right way, that wreaks havoc on your internal sense of what is called coherence, which is basically simply an organized sense of yourself and identity. And so dissociation itself can become traumatizing. Now, I know many individuals in relationships might hear this information and think, but I didn't suffer any trauma. I had a perfectly normal childhood. This doesn't explain why I'm struggling in relationships. Now, to this, I would say there are two possibilities here. Number one, yes, it's possible that you had a secure and somewhat normal childhood, whatever normal means. But your survival system can still become newly activated in any adult situation, just as it can also be threatened in childhood. Though, if your safety was frequently threatened in childhood, you are likely to be more predisposed to experiencing insecure attachment in adult relationships. Now, the second possibility is maybe you only think you had a normal childhood. Because when dysfunction is the norm, it's hard to tell what is normal and what isn't. And I might even argue what we qualify as normal is actually kind of dysfunctional. And it is likely that whatever dysfunction you did experience was passing itself off as normal. So you may have constructed a lot of unconscious defenses and beliefs against recognizing this dysfunction for what it really was. Now, in teasing out the effects of trauma, trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk proposes that there are two types of trauma. And these two types can look very different. In fact, one of these two types tends to pass itself off as normal behavior. Now, in the next video in this series, we are going to dig deeper and explore how developmental traumas can manifest in what we might otherwise call normal childhood experiences. It's important to realize that becoming increasingly secure is not about waving a magic wand and finally inspiring a partner to say, do, act, and be the way you want them to be. It's more about agreeing to becoming a fact-finding investigator, becoming a conscious and somewhat detached observer of who you are and what you really want. So you can finally determine if your partner truly aligns with you in a compatible relationship. It's making a decision to base your relationship on conscious values, beliefs, and priorities, rather than on unconscious attachment impulses and survival mode fears, or even based on codependent enmeshment posing as empathy. Now, if you've experienced significant personal growth as a result of intentional self-reflection, but your partner responds to your bids for increasing intimacy by becoming increasingly belligerent, defensive, or toxic, then it's a sure sign that they have likely struggled with significant attachment traumas. And so increasing authenticity is going to make them increasingly defensive and sometimes even offended. This means that their waking concept of themselves has become over-identified with the energy of survival, which both fuels and is served by the ego and its defenses. In other words, they are over-identified with a mental construct that tells them that love and relationships are unsafe because, in their experience, it was. But just because they're not able to grow with you, it doesn't make them a villain. But it does mean that if you are ready to let go of your traumas, and they are not, then you are no longer on parallel paths. And that means that you have some decisions to make. Now, I know many of us will not allow ourselves the freedom that we seek unless we can understand how and why it is that our partner is so unwilling to do what it would take to love themselves as much as we love them. We don't want to abandon them to their own self-hatred and self-sabotaging behaviors because at one time there was a part of us that wanted to be rescued too. But this is a journey that they must take on their own with the appropriate and properly trained support. And unfortunately, you cannot force or convince someone to seek out and or accept that support if they are unwilling. Their inner conflicts are embedded in the synaptic pathways of their brain and in their nervous system. And unless they are willing of their own free will to address their automatic programming on the level of the body, you will be stuck in a dysfunctional cycle with them through what is sometimes referred to as trauma bonding or trauma reenactments. You know, maybe they don't know what they don't know. And you might stick around long enough to find out if this new knowledge would turn their head in the same way that it turned yours. We would not, of course, test a child on a subject that they had never learned. But once they have the information and they have been made aware and they persist in toxic ways of being, well, that's a whole new level of personal accountability, isn't it? And more than that, it's really all the information that you need. Because effectively now, if you remain with this person of your own free will, it means that you are equally unwilling to acknowledge what emotional growth you are now capable of. It doesn't mean you have to abandon them, but it does mean that you will need to change the nature of your connection so as to honor the reality of where you now are in your process and of where they are in theirs. Now, as a reminder, this is the third video in a series derived from a lesson taken from my course, Healing Attachment Wounds with Mindfulness and Creative Arts Interventions. In this course, I help insecure individuals adopt a position of what I call self-sovereignty, so that they can truly be present and show up for themselves. For example, when Keturah decided to purchase this course, she was struggling with self-doubt and beating herself up because no amount of logic or rational insight could talk her out of her feelings for a previous partner. Through this course, she gained better awareness, empathy, and insight into herself, and felt artistically inspired. The guided meditations and arts-based activities were really Keturah's favorite exercises because it allowed her to externalize her feelings and work with them in a way that led to tangible results.
Well, probably like a lot of people here, I was frustrated. I was really irritated with myself because I felt like I know what's going on. I just can't, why can't I feel the way I want to feel? I would say number one, I gained validation. That was really important for me because I felt like I was going crazy. Empathy, that was the other thing. I learned empathy not only for myself to be easier on myself, but also to kind of turn the tables a little bit and look at how the other person might be feeling, what that other person might be going through. I think that the art part of it was my favorite. I enjoyed being able to connect with my feelings in a very tangible way. So now that the course is done, I have actual pieces that reflect how I feel. And I remember what I was feeling when I created those pieces. And then it also gave me the skills and the ability to continue doing that from here on out. It's like now I can take these feelings, everything that was jumbled up inside of me, and actually put it on a piece of paper or create. I like to sew and different things like that, or sing it, to be able to creatively get it out of me.
Now, if you would like to learn more about my signature course, Healing Attachment Wounds with Mindfulness and Creative Arts Interventions, I invite you to check out a link in the caption of this video where you will receive a special discount offer. And lastly, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. In our next video, we will be talking about how developmental traumas manifest in ways that we might otherwise describe as normal childhood experiences. Thank you for watching.